Bonjour, everybody. My name is Bailey Walkie. I am the founder of Frayed Feathers, an Indigenous youth-led consultancy business that solves collaboration challenges for teams. And today, you're listening to the Frayed Feathers podcast, I believe number 5. Womp womp. And today, we are going to be unpacking the common topic of discussion in youth policy of what does representation at all levels mean. Okay, so my goal today is going to be starting small and kind of building it out. I want to give some insight into what it means to kind of like be a young leader in the context of policy. Like, what is the stream in which that happens? And then also kind of like the challenges of actually having true representation at all levels. All right. So let's start small. I want to talk about the definition of representation. So when you Google representation, I got two. So the first one is the action of speaking or acting on behalf of somebody or the state of being so represented. So this is like a lawyer, like when you have representation at a court case or any legal proceeding. That's not what we're talking about today. What we're talking about is the second definition here that reads, the description or portrayal of somebody or something in a particular way or as being of a certain nature. So a certain nature really kind of boils down to like an embodiment. You know what I mean? Like, what are like the natural components of somebody, right? Like, what are their characteristics? What are the values of this person, the principles? And then how do they act in accordance with those values and principles, right? Because it's not just about, actions speak louder than words, I guess is what I was going to say. But anyway, so just to kind of give an example of what what levels we're referring to in the policy space. So in government, it'll be something simple like municipal, provincial, and federal levels of government. But I totally recognize that each of those government systems, have levels of governance within them, of course. And then more broadly, and I think this kind of applies to most nonprofit organizations in Canada, where you have 6 levels of government, or 6 levels of the organization, I should say, not like of government, but just kind of like what youth are referring to when they say like levels, representation at all levels. So, and in an organization, let's say, for example, a friendship center. I don't think you need to be picky on this. Any friendship center, I don't think they always, but they like consistently have youth councils, and so these youth councils can actually vote on they have like an election for like the National Youth Council and stuff. And so anyway, so these youth councils, let's say they're like the first level in this example. A caseworker would be the second level. So a caseworker meaning like the person who's coordinating the program. Maybe the youth council is like one program, like one function, like or one responsibility they have of many. Maybe they operate a variety of programs. Their third level in that organization would be the program manager. So the person who the caseworker reports to, right? Like any challenges they're having, if they need more, need an increase on budget, what's the feedback from the youth council right now? After the program manager, which is number 3, you have the director. So maybe you'll have like a director of operations, or you'll have a director of youth services and a director of operations. Like, people kind of do it differently. And then 5th, you have an executive director. So the captain of the ship per se, the person who the directors report to. And then lastly, you have the board of directors, which is so many directors. You have the executive director's boss, right? So the board of directors of an organization typically focus on like governance of that organization. And then everyone else is about like the operations, besides the ED. And so anyway, like these are the levels that youth are referring to when they say like representation at all levels. So for example, like this premise like applies to everything. So, for example, like there was young Indigenous leaders in the Senate just last week, and I think almost all of them said at least one line or two about representation at all levels. And some of the youth were referring to like it doesn't mean just the Senate, like it also means the House, meaning like the House of Commons. And yeah, so like there needs to be more happening at in every core function of a system, right? So like at all levels of a system, there needs to be youth representation. Okay. So so now that we've got that out of the way, I want to describe why we don't have representation, or why I feel we don't have representation. Okay. So if we think about the organization example we just gave, the number one reason, in my opinion, there's not representation at all those levels is that the expectations stand. Okay. So like if you haven't been an entry level staff, if you haven't been a caseworker before, it's going to be very hard for a young person to be a manager. Okay. And then and then the same thing for a director and an executive director and so forth. Right. And of course, like you can scale down the responsibilities of the job, right? Like if you're a manager of a program, but that program is very small, well, you're still a manager, right? But, I think we also need to be practical in that, organizations, everybody serves a function, and, we always talk about equity, or I should say we always talk about equity, but like, in consideration of equity and stuff like that, like we need to be, we can't be reducing the responsibilities of a role just so that like a young person can have a title, right? So the young person, despite having significantly less life experience and opportunities to just be in the professional world and stuff, they are going to have the same expectations whenever they submit the resume as somebody who has 10 years experience on them. So I think that's number one. And I don't think that that's surprising to anybody. But then secondly, in these situations where youth have an opportunity to share their voice, in meetings or whatever like that, like it's very difficult to give an expert opinion when you've not been paid 8 hours a day for years to learn about, to be a subject matter expert, essentially, right? So for example, like me as a youth policy analyst, whenever I go into youth council meetings and like the youth, what they're saying is true. Like they're not lying. Like there is these things happening, but they're not, kind of like what I talked about last week about like my job as a youth policy analyst, like keep a pulse on what the government's doing and like be subscribed to all these newsletters and, really stay up to date. Like that takes hours of my day, like almost every day. Like the first hour of my job is just like getting into the swing of things, like catching up on all the newsletters that were sent to me overnight. And yeah, just reading for an hour about news. And like, yeah, like sure, youth from youth councils could do that, but like we got to consider like the profile of the people who are engaging in youth councils. Like if you're a nonprofit, and you have youth council members, these council members have probably found themselves in deep levels of need in multiple points in their life. I say this as a previous youth council member, and a lot of those youth like are just surviving, like trying to figure out how to navigate like getting their needs met in addition to like building quality relationships. Like there's like I don't think the like saying they're behind is the right way, I think, are the right terminology. I think it's more about like they've been forced to learn other skills before before others, you know what I mean? Like for example, like like if you're learning to survive, like you might learn how to really take care of yourself, like be really independent and be on time and go to jobs and get all these things done. But you may not have learned how to build a quality relationship with people, because like it's really hard to trust people when the people around you weren't trustworthy. But you know how to take care of yourself, right? So now like you have this dynamic of like, okay, well, how do I learn these things? like how do I need to go backwards in my journey per se, and learn these things to then like kind of meet the level of experience they have in like being independent, right? And so anyway, my point is that like this young person is not paid to do these things, right? Like they're like focused on like their interpersonal challenges and things like this. They don't, yeah, they're just not paid to do all these different things and like keep a pulse on what the government's doing. So they don't have, this is the point. I swear I was getting to it. They don't have the language to communicate about the challenges that the organization is having in a way that is going to be offer like concrete solutions and directions to the people in the room, which is what people are doing, right? Like if you have a meeting, whether it's with leadership, C-suite, entry level, senior leadership, like it's always to make a decision in some way. And so like in order to yeah, so like young leaders struggle to have the discourse, the words to that are going to resonate with the people in the room, right? So it's like really hard to appreciate their opinion, because it's like a basic school of thought that you've heard many times over, and like even though you agree, like there's not really much you can do with their input, you know what I mean? And like it's like the reason why I explained all like what they're going through in the profile of people is because it's like we shouldn't expect them to, you know what I mean? And but nonetheless, this is why we don't have representation. It's because of one of these key factors. Okay, so then thirdly, why we don't have representation. In trying to build leaders, current leadership staff doesn't know how to get the best out of young leaders, thus limiting them. And what I mean by this is that it's very difficult to find a way to highlight young leadership when you don't have the means to build up their understanding to a high level, right? So for example, like if you're in a nonprofit, like you probably don't even have that much money for the youth council themselves, right? Let alone pay a youth for a week to come in every day for like 3 hours or something like that and mentor them in a way that like really stays with them, you know what I mean? So a lot of what nonprofits are doing is like really focusing on, well, let's serve as many as we can, because like there's such a high level of need out there. And so a lot of what the opportunities out there for young leaders are not like they're like they're like for beginners, you know what I mean? It's like, okay, this is how you advocate, this is what the government's doing. These are like the stats of like, why we need your help. And yeah, it's like kind of like the expectations are pretty low for the young person who's coming in. It's like, you're more expected and rewarded for just showing up and being committed and like, oh, thank you so much for like donating your time. We understand, you're going through challenges like I had explained earlier. But you're here committed to learning new things and like, here's an honorarium and like, don't forget to grab an extra plate of food on your way out and stuff like that. And like, that's great, but it's not cultivating leaders. It's not building leaders to the level where we can then have levels of representation everywhere. That's my point. And then my last point on this is that a lot of opportunities for experience are not accompanied by mentorship. It's my opinion that opportunities are only as good as the mentorship accompanying is. And therefore, I think there's a lot of opportunities that come to nonprofits and institutions where they're like, oh, this would be a great opportunity for so-and-so from the youth council to take on. And really it's kind of like nobody at the organization was able to take on the opportunity. Maybe they don't like doing whatever that particular opportunity is. And then they say, oh, well, like, what about that high functioning youth leader from our council or something like that? Okay, so In my opinion, typically these examples or opportunities, they come in through the form of like public speaking, right? Because they like, and I don't think like it's bad. I think it's because like nonprofits, like they see the value and magic that young people are bringing into their organization, and I think that they want to showcase that, and I think that that's like a beautiful thing. But the challenge is that a lot of people don't actually enjoy public speaking. They don't want to make PowerPoint presentations. And if they do, like, they're quite frankly, like, not that good. Like, most of the talking points are on the slides. Like, so they just end up reading the slides. And, like when you're reading, you don't modulate your voice all that much. And so it's like not engaging. And, there's so many like little things about presenting that are just not like passed down to somebody, to a young leader, because the folks in the organization don't actually have those soft skills themselves. And so this is like, I feel like this premise applies to a lot of youth council or youth leader opportunities. Like it's just like an opportunity for you to get experience or exposure. I should say that it's more about exposure rather than experience, because if you're putting together the presentation on your own, and the only thing that's really getting taken care of you is like the gathering of the audience, and your travel accommodations are paid and organized for you, like you should be getting paid. You know what I mean? Like you're making the presentation, you're making the talking points, you're the one rehearsing, like there's so many like other things. And so yeah, and so like if there's no mentorship along with the opportunity, then like what's the point? And I think that like there's a lot of youth who get opportunities but no mentorship. And I think that that like really limits people, because you can get this perception, because like if you're not employed and you want to be a youth leader, well, I mean, getting all these opportunities, like that's pretty good. You know what I mean? Like it's not nothing. And you should be taking those things, because like, that's like how you build, that's how you do get experience and stuff like this. But the point is like it's not a true mentorship opportunity. It's not going to accelerate your growth. It's just another thing you can do. So yeah, so I think that that's the four main reasons why we don't have representation at all levels. And it mostly boils down to expectations and leadership not having the resources and means, or sometimes expertise, to bring young people to that level of expectation that they and all these other sector leaders have. Okay. So let me look at my notes here. I like kind of just like talking. Talked a little bit about the youth council experience. Actually, I don't think I did. I've re-recorded this a couple times, just like I want to make sure I do it the best I can. So I'm like, did I say this? Did I say that? But I want to talk a little bit about the youth council experience, just like what this might actually look like. Actually, you know what? I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to go tie this back into youth representation. So representation, I talked about earlier, is like the embodiment of something, right? Like it is the suite of characteristics that we see in somebody to then feel represented through them. And that's like a really warm fuzzy feeling. That's an amazing thing. We should all strive to have representation in our initiatives so young people feel that. And I want to give some perspective as to like what a young leader is like probably going through, and then why representation would be some art, like what other young leaders are thinking when they see that young leader. In my opinion, I think that that was understandable. I'm gonna move this down. I think I'll edit this out, but like we'll see. But like I'm just gonna move to the seated position. Alrighty. Okay, yeah, we're back. All right, yeah, we are back from the seated position. So, what it means to be young is what I called this section. So a young professional excelling at something where other young people get to witness them is a type of representation we're talking about. Secondly, I should have not have read that out. Secondly, is we recognize what would have gone into being in that position. So, what I hope when people see what I'm doing, people meaning like other young people, like I hope that they recognize like what I'm doing in the background to, like build a consultancy, have a podcast where I have intellectual things to say. All when I talk about my experience and like what has led me to this position, like um, I hope that they believe or think that I'm doing a lot of good things that a leader would do. So, for example, like reading books. I'm listening to leaders. I want to hear what they have to say so that I can position myself in a better way, and or build out my professional opinion too. I want them to think that I'm volunteering to position myself for better opportunities, and that I'm showing up in the right places to network, and of course doing good work in my day-to-day job. Like despite being wanting to build a consultancy in frayed feathers, I am also still committed to doing all my core functions as a policy analyst at AMA, as to the best of my ability, right? And so this is like this is what I think whenever I see a young leader. Like I'm like, oh, okay, like they're reading books, like they're filling their information, they're like learning outside of like work hours, like they are going to conferences, networking events, the chambers of commerce. They're trying to volunteer themselves to do presentations at corporations so that that corporation knows to keep that person at the top of their mind whenever it's their business, whenever they would need their like the core function of their business or service. Um, like that's what I'm thinking. And so like I would hope that other young people see that whenever they see me going to conferences and talking on a podcast and like all these shenanigans, right? Um and so, like I kind of want to talk about the types of challenges that a young leader may be facing, because in understanding the challenges a young leader is having, we can then better support them to rise to those expectations, right? And like this is something that I'm doing now. I'm trying to rise to new expectations, not only in my career, but in other aspects of my life too. Like I was a boyfriend, then fiance, now a husband, and like I want to build my baseline for being a husband. Like I want to be an even better husband than I was a fiance. You know what I mean? And like I want to continue to be um I just want to keep striving for greatness essentially. And so like, even though I'm kind of that premise earlier about like, even though I'm building a consultancy, I'm still going to do the best my abilities in my day job. Same thing with my relationship. Just because I'm building a consultancy does not mean that I'm sacrificing any parts of my relationship. And yeah, I think that there was a point to that. But anyway, we're gonna go into the types of challenges for young leaders, so then we can better support them to rise to the expectations. Oh yes, that's what it was about, expectations. So the first major challenge is there is a lack of strong social circle. Social circle meaning just like everybody around them, like doing the same things that they're doing. So I have down here that being a leader in general is a lonely endeavor, not just being a young leader or a young indigenous leader. Like if you're a leader in any space, it's going to be, I wouldn't say a lonely road, but like there can only be so many leaders, you know what I mean? So naturally you're going to have a much smaller pool of people to engage with. I do think that it can be especially lonely for a young indigenous leader. And And I think that it's not specifically because they're young and indigenous, it's because of all the societal challenges that come along with being indigenous. So like this applies to indigenous people who have been colonized across all the world. It's like you've overcome so much personal challenges and societal challenges to get yourself in a position where you can hold down employment, you can engage in these programs, you can articulate yourself, you have the soft skills to work with other people in a collaborative way, which is incredibly, incredibly valuable. Like if you're easy to work with, like, dude, you're halfway in the door. Like, do not underestimate what it means to be someone that people enjoy working with. If you have these core sets of skills, like, you probably had to work really hard to get those skills, I've talked a little bit in my first podcast about my personal challenges with like having an unsafe home and going down a path of substance use, housing insecurity, and all these things. And, a lot of the things, like, I felt stupid for not knowing, to be honest, like, but, kind of, like in learning how to be independent, and learning how to survive, as some may say, I had a very undervalued like core aspects of being a human being. Like I didn't value relationships. And I don't mean like intimate romantic relationships, like friends. Like I didn't have many friends growing up. It was like mostly my cousins, and like when I did have friends, like I couldn't hold on to them for a very long time. Like I just didn't understand what it meant to be a good friend. And then whenever I kind of did start learning how to be a good friend, I was like too good of a friend. I was like overbearing. And yeah, so like what I'm trying to say is like, there's a lot of like soft skills, that are really, really difficult to learn when you don't have like that support system, right? Like I said, I grew up in an unsafe home, like didn't really have a group of people that I can like bounce ideas off of all the time. You know what I mean? And like it wasn't all bad, like I have an older sister, younger brother, beautiful wife now, but like we were all going through it at the same time. You know what I mean? Like now I can talk to them and, we've kind of all like worked it out, figured it out a little bit. But when you're 14, 15 years old and, you're going through all these different things, like it's really hard to picture yourself in your 20s and 30s being somebody who's going to, like save the community, you know what I mean? Like with policy, and like you're going to address policy authorities so First Nations people can be better served by the government, and you're learning about your treaty and all these different things. It's like man, I got things whipping past my head at night, you know what I mean? Like I'm trying to survive till tomorrow, you know what I mean? And so anyway, like if you get to that point where you're in your 20s and 30s, you've developed the soft skills despite the challenges, you're killing it, doing all this stuff, it's like, why would I want to work in nonprofit and policy where like I'm just reliving all the horrible things that happened to me whenever I was a child, and or maybe even not that happened to them, but like they witnessed all throughout their childhood, right? Like even if you have a safe household, if you grow up in an impoverished area, like you're going to be affected. And so, and like, seeing your friends in pain and stuff, that hurts you. And, there's a lot of stuff there. And so and so you might like just want to go make money. You know what I mean? Like if you, like, I could have gone down a path of going into a for-profit organization or company, and I would be making significantly more money than I am in nonprofit, but it's not as fulfilling to me, And I feel like I'm one of the more rare cases. I wouldn't say like a rarer case, but the more rare cases where I was like, okay, I'm now going from my experience of being of having all these societal challenges and personal challenges. Now I want to support people, and I went down the path of social service work. But that's not that's not the majority. You know what I mean? Like most people, they just want to like they just want what they didn't have. They want a safe household. They want quality relationships. You know, they're not worried about having federal level representation for young people. Like they don't even know what youth policy is. They don't know what the about indigenous youth roots or the indigenous youth reconciliation barometer or the Truth and Reconciliation Commission or DRIPA or UNDRIP. Like they have no flipping idea, bro. Like like they've been so focused on like surviving. And so like you're not only do you have like a small pool of people, but you also have but like you're also like relying on them to want to live a life of like the nonprofit and policy lifestyle, which is like to always be working with some of like the most morbid ideas in society. You know what I mean? Like, and as an indigenous person, like understanding more and more about government and how policies came into play, like all these things were set, or I shouldn't say all these things, but a lot of these things were set up in a way to disenfranchise my people. Like that's not a good feeling reading about. Like it doesn't make me feel good. But I understand the value in having a podcast and trying to talk about these things in a way that my peers can then learn about them, or at least kind of like catch a little tidbit here and there so they can kind of like be better informed. And so, yeah, there's a very small pool of people who are committed to this work. And so that's always going to be a challenge. And yeah, they don't want to like in getting out of poor experiences, they don't want to go back and deal with the ideas of all those poor experiences and like trying to make them better, right? They just want to like build a quality life for themselves. Secondly, type of challenge. The second major type of challenge for young leaders is tokenistic opportunities. So opportunities feel more just like you're showing up and that like you're rewarded for just being there, right? Like kind of talking about earlier in the youth councils where like you're just rewarded for being in the room, right? Like you have demonstrated a level of passion and integrity to just show up on time and learn for an hour and a half about whatever the topic might be. And there's not really like any expectations or responsibilities that come along with going, you know? So this might be in the context of like, you know, oh, let's do a workshop. Here's an honorarium. Here's some food, you know, just listen to the presentation and like, you're good to go. Peace out. Thanks for coming. But there could also be like the same premise, but now it's like a work meeting. It's like, hey, young leader, want to come to, I have a meeting with the director of an external stakeholder, or like a director in the ministry. You know, like, would you like to come along with this meeting? You know, like you can take notes or something like that, and whatever. And they're like, okay, cool. So you go there, and you know, the person who brought you obviously wants to like highlight you and like oh, here's our youth and they're so awesome and you know whatever, and like give you, the young leader, an experience to like talk to folks in the ministry. But you know, kind of like what I talked about earlier, and like how young leaders are not paid 8 hours a day for thousands of days to learn about have an exhaustive understanding of something, like be a subject matter expert. You know, like their opinion is like really hard to take seriously. You know what I mean? Like, you know, say for example, you're a nonprofit, you're talking with a ministry, and you know, like you give the spotlight to the youth, and they start talking about how they would like to see more budget, more funding, more resources to the nonprofit sector, and all this and that, and like just kind of like general points about how like we need more support. You know, like we're doing a bunch of great things. We'd like to do more of it. You know, like we would love to have more opportunities to give back to our community. Meanwhile, like the director from this ministry, like maybe like totally agrees, but they don't like have any function with what you're taught with what that youth is saying. And so they're kind of just like, well, yeah, like thanks, like yeah, I totally agree, and that's why we're doing this work, and committed to doing this thing, whatever. But then imagine if the youth was given that opportunity to talk, and then they said, hey, director, I understand that your ministry was given this mandate via the mandate letters about a year and a half ago. I know that your job position as the director of so and so whatever, you're probably like have some sort of hand in like this item. I'm very interested to learn about how like our organization can support this item that you're mandated to deliver on. Like I'd be happy to like have a meeting with you to discuss like some of my ideas and whatever. And then it's like immediately like, oh wow, look, this young person has a solution and they want to use my time to build out this solution. It's like, okay, well now you're cooking with grease. You know what I mean? Now you have a deep opinion about something, and you can then kind of like build a network that way by having this opinion about a specific thing, and like whatever. But like that's the whole point. It's like, if you're not paying a youth to do all this research, then what's the point? You know what I mean? Like they're not going to have that level of detail to say to a director in a ministry. Excuse me. Okay, so whenever they're in the room, young leaders are in the room, it's hard to take them seriously. And it's just a lack of exposure. They don't have the dialogue, the discourse to communicate about the challenges in a way that is meaningful to the stakeholders present. So then lastly, to this point about tokenistic opportunities, is that young leaders, like true young leaders, like ones who want to be, like have high aspirations and dreams, they want to excel, okay? They want to be very good at something. They want to be the next whatever it might be in their niche. For me, I want to be a leader in young indigenous reconciliation strategy development. Like whenever teams are coming together to create youth reconciliation strategies, whether it be like related to land or services or reconnection to culture, or abroad opportunities, like whatever it might be related to reconciliation. Like I want to be the person that people think, oh, we got to bring in Bailey because Bailey will get us all situated in the best possible way for our project, our youth reconciliation project, aka strategy, to be top notch. It'll like ensure the success of the program. That's what I want. That's what I want to excel at and like position myself in. And so these young leaders, they have their own thing. They have their own niche that they want to be the expert in. And so it can be very disheartening when that person, that young leader who has this like ideal about themselves, and expectations and responsibilities also. Like I talked earlier about how like, reading, listening to leaders, going to conferences, networking with the right people, like, they're like really trying to push for that. It is incredibly disheartening to be invited into a meeting where you're kind of used as like a prop to demonstrate someone's commitment to young people. You know what I mean? And like, I think that this definitely happens in the nonprofit sector sometimes, is like, we want to bring our young leaders to places because we see how awesome they are, but we don't consider that the young leader might not have had a clear expectation about like how they didn't have a clear expectation about how they were meant to engage in the opportunity. And so they might they might prepare a lot just to not have to use any of their comments, or like, feel like belittled almost by like saying so little, but also being like acknowledged for like a deep level of expertise or something. Like it gets like a little, the adjectives in the room get a little too much there, and you're just like, man, I'm hard. Like they're hard on themselves. You know what I mean? Like they know what it means to do a good job at something. And like when they've done a mediocre job and everyone else is like praising them, I think that like that doesn't feel good. You know what I mean? Like Coaches, if you have a good player on your team, the best thing a coach could do is coach that player really hard, because that player is going to excel so much. And I don't mean coach hard as in like be abusive to them, but like put high expectations on them, give them real roles and responsibilities, and they will live up to it. You know what I mean? And so, a lot of these times, these tokenistic opportunities are just opportunities given to people, not really much mentorship or expectation setting with them. And then the youth leader who wants to make an opportunity out of this thing realizes that they're really just there to show up and save 5 minutes of an opening, and then everybody gawks at them for an hour, and they're like, well, it's not that cool. Okay. And I kind of talked on this a little bit, as far as like there's a lack of quality mentorship opportunities, because I was talking about how like there's opportunities are only as good as the mentorship that comes along with them. But now, like what I'm referring to with lack of quality mentorship opportunities, I'm referring to like the actual programs and grants and opportunities out there that are like official opportunities, and how they're not, they're just focused on beginners, in my opinion. So I feel like, so for example, like I'm an entrepreneur, I want to build a consultancy. And so a lot of the grants and indigenous youth entrepreneurship programs and stuff that I've been looking into, they're actually not very helpful to me. So for example, like a lot of these programs are based around giving you mentorship with a little bit of money, because then they want you to like go experiment on like what you learned. And that's great. But like for me, I'm in the context of like I was able to secure a full-time position at an organization that pays me well, and I went and got my own coaching. I spent 10 grand to be in a coaching community for facilitators for a year. You know what I mean? Like I'm receiving professional level coaching every single week. And so I had a very high return on time investment to learn what it means and the core functions of being an entrepreneur quickly. And so now I feel like I'm in a position where I've outgrown, not to say like you can't always learn things. Like I'm not saying that like I've learned everything there is to know about being a beginner entrepreneur. It's about like, what's my return on time investment if I was going to take these mentorship opportunities? If you have a 3-month mentorship grant opportunity that's only going to give me 5 grand, like, dude, it's not worth my time to be in a program for 3 months just to get 5 grand on the end of it. Okay. Like, and I'm not a baller. Like, it's just the point. I'm at a position in my consultancy where like, I want to scale. I want to like kick things off in a very big way. And so like, a vast majority of these mentorship opportunities, these mentorship programs or entrepreneur programs, they just don't apply to me. Like I just, like I couldn't benefit from everything they have to teach me. And so therefore, when I consider the amount of time I'll have to put into the core functions of the program, I could have continued doing what I'm doing and got a bank loan and got much further. You know what I mean? And so like that's kind of what I mean in like, it's focused on beginners. Like what happens like to that next level, like once you've gotten past the youth council level and like you've secured full-time employment, you now you are a subject matter expert on something, you have this professional opinion. Like, what do you do with that? You know what I mean? And I know that like, this can come off a little whiny, but like, it comes down to like you needing to create your own opportunity, like in finding a mentor, like in finding like someone in your network that like you can get along with and do all this stuff. And like kind of work through your challenges like personally. But like, it's really hard to do that and do all the other things you're doing, right? Because not only like you have this consultancy you're trying to do, your full-time job, your relationships, but like you're also like have high expectations for the mentor to understand you and your complex special experience, right? Like we're all special, right? And so anyway, like, I liken this to CEOs, you know what I mean? Think about how many CEOs like cycle through business coaches, you know what I mean? They like have a business coach for 1 to 3 months. They're like, okay, I've learned everything you have to teach me. And then they move on to the next one, you know? And like, you know, I understand business coaching is totally different than like mentoring, right? But the point is that like you're putting, you're essentially like needing to put your trust and relationship building skills to the test in trying to build this mentorship relationship. But, you know, like this is what I mean. And like there's a lack of quality mentorship opportunities. Like I'm now describing making my own opportunity, like just going out and talking to somebody, be like, hey, would you be open to mentoring me through this period of my business journey or something like that? And so, like, how do you so basically, like, to kind of give a timeline of like what I'm kind of trying to show here, you know, you're a youth, you have challenges in life, you know, you have an unsafe home, you overcome those challenges, you know, say like you're turning 15 to 18ish, you're overcoming the challenges, you know, like you're going to your local nonprofit, you're building up and concreting, excuse me, your values in life, you know what I mean, to ensure you're always acting in a way that, you know, aligns with our perception of like a good person, right? And then you go and try to like kind of get your way, volunteer, find your way into a leadership position within the youth council, or, you know, maybe you become the caseworker of the youth council, you know, now you're coordinating the program, and you're really trying to build out, you know, now like your own niche leadership, like your own, like trying to build out what it means to be a leader in this like niche thing that you have expertise on, that nobody's really taught you much on. You know, you've all like had to learn it yourself through like reading books, listening to leaders, and having different having your opinions being challenged online by random people and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like you're learning how to learn on your own. Then you get into a position where, you know, you're being recognized by your community for all the amazing work you're doing. They bring you into these leadership opportunities where like you're, you know, you have an opportunity to engage with people, but you don't like, you're realizing you don't quite have the lingo and discourse to like resonate with what they're, with like who they are, and like what, and like see the magic of like what you're offering, I guess. And then you realize that like, you know, you don't really have a clear idea of like all the details. You know, I talked earlier about like the minister letter and like the items in the minister letter, how can they be roped into that information or into that project? You know, you don't have all those things, but now you're expected to find a mentor to bring all these things together for you. Meanwhile, you don't know how to communicate about all those things in a way that makes somebody like motivated and like want to support you. You know what I mean? Like basically it's like you do all this work up to this one point, and then it feels like you're like getting pushed back when you're like really just kind of moving to the next chapter in like trying to build out your own opportunities. And so yeah, so like the point is like there's so much lack of frame of reference for the next step. Okay, I want my next step to get there. I have no idea how to get there. You know what I mean? And so like, yeah, there's a lack of quality mentorship opportunities to like illustrate that for youth. And so that sums up why we have challenges to, or the challenges to having representation at all levels. You know, there are youth who are doing great things. You know, I think there's a lot of young people who deserve to be celebrated, and we should continue celebrating them. But, you know, for every showcase of a youth, there's hundreds, thousands of Indigenous youth who were never offered the chance, or have the capabilities, have it in them, you know what I mean, but don't have the right circumstance to get there. And so like the next time we think about like, well, how can we increase representation at all levels, like youth representation at all levels, I encourage you to like re-listen to this podcast and think about, well, like what is the experience of the young leaders in my community, and like kind of like pick an item out of this podcast to kind of like begin building on with them, or maybe use my experience to kind of ask questions to your young people about their experience and like filling that gap too, because kind of what I talked about here earlier is like leadership staff don't know how to get the best out of youth leaders and thus limits them. So like, building out a response with them and using that response as a learning opportunity, like building out that response as the actual like as the actual tool you're using to educate them on, I think is like really valuable. It's like not only like motivating because like by helping you, they're helping themselves, but also like they get to see like what goes into creating these things. So yeah, so like let's give them the means to communicate about the challenges they're having in a way that is going to land with the people above us, right? If you're a caseworker, what could a youth leader say to your manager that's going to be profound to them? Think about that. And if you don't think that your youth leaders are in a position to say anything to your program manager, like that would be profound, like that's just not where their capacity is at. How could you elevate their capacity to reach that point? Not saying it won't be hard, but like that's what youth leadership means. It's about our youth representation at all levels means. It means that everyone in that system, all the way up to the federal government system, hears what they have to say and agrees and feels it's profound and it's intelligent, like there's so many different aspects to this. So anyway, I think I've hit my point down. I'm trying to be concise as possible. This has been the Frayed Feathers podcast. I will be back next Tuesday, and sign up for my newsletter that is going to be launching this, I guess yesterday. So I'm recording this on Saturday, but it's launching on the Monday. So yeah, check out the Monday Frayed Feathers. I'm going to be writing articles, giving commentary, and my door's opening. Peace.